quite proud to go around and speak in a whole number of places, and I think there's an interrelation between actually what people can do when they're in these sort of positions to build sort of generalised support and solidarity for what's going on. And I wanted to bring kind of a message from a student in Greece. I've been around, part of a speaking tour around the country, following around the occupations, trying to kind of raise awareness, and a bit of the message from there. Because I think the way of occupation in Britain is nothing like the level of kind of what's happened in Greece. You can start to see the seeds of what's happened there happening here. And when you think about the connections between the generalised movement against the war and kind of the role of kind of the politicisation and the action that's taken place on campuses, I think it's been put very clearly on the continent, where actually a wave of student occupations managed to coincide with major national mobilisations against the occupation of Gaza, a whole range of different issues, and actually culminating in the two coming together to challenge their government, the role of their government in Greece, in the occupation of Gaza by marching on a tiny little port on the border where the American government was using Greece as a place to shop arms into the Israeli IDF so they could bombard the people of Gaza. And actually a mass protest there forced the hand of the government into cancelling their links with the American support for the occupation in Gaza, and actually pulled out the ship from from sailing into Israeli waters to deliver kind of bombs to be dropped on the heads of Palestinians. I think that when you start talking about that, you start to talk about actually the sort of movement that we need to really build in the UK. But I don't think we should understate in any level kind of the significance of the occupations that's taken place in Britain. By my count, this is the biggest wave of student occupations to take place since 1977 at the very kind of most conservative estimate. And actually what it's meant for the student movement in this country is quite significant, because not only is it meant for the first time that those that want to put the argument that really that mass kind of radical action can win, can do so on quite a large scale, it's also been that those individuals that have been prepared to take those mass actions have actually pulled around them quite a significant layer of new activists and related to the huge numbers of people that have been politicised by general anti-war mobilisations, politicised into understanding the role of imperialism, understanding the links between what's happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the fact that Israel's felt confident into bombarding Gaza. And it starts to create the basis of actually rebuilding stop the war activism on our campuses on a completely new scale. And I used earlier the example of kind of the action in Glasgow University, which was on a much smaller scale than what some people are talking about. But I think it's something that's worth saying, that even in universities that have yet to go into occupation, actually the message of what's happened has inspired a new layer of activists, so that when 45 people got together to have a rally outdoors in the snow, actually they were prepared to meet 4 hours afterwards to discuss what they can do to start build up solidarity, to build a movement in Glasgow University, so the next time there's a flashpoint in the war on terror, the next time Israel feels confident to go into Palestine or America bombs Pakistan, they'll be better placed to join in and can strengthen the kind of generalised resistance. And I think the role of what we're talking about now is kind of the way forward for the student movement. I think there's two things that we need to do quite directly in terms of our solidarity with Palestine. One is to tell absolutely everyone that will listen on every campus about the successes and the victories of the occupations that have happened, to draw people together on a national scale, to make sure that when the next thing happens, we'll be much stronger. But I think also to kind of raise the political level and the links between what's taking place on campus and the broader national struggle in this country for international solidarity and against our own government's role. And I want to echo what Chris really said about kind of NATO and Afghanistan and the big demonstrations that are coming up. Because actually, I've spent a lot of time with kind of the activists from Greece coming over, and what they stress was the most central part of the occupations that they took part in was their ability to interrelate, to build on, draw strength from, and actually give support to a much broader movement in society, challenging the aims of their government and the role in their government in kind of the wider war on terror. I think that's what both the G20 and the NATO mobilisations are about. It's about drawing together the massive diversity of struggles that have started to take place, the diversity of demands and solidarity movements that have happened around kind of the Israeli bombardment of Gaza, which hasn't just been the occupations, it's been demonstrations in universities with quite a low political kind of level of general kind of activity in places like Birmingham that have come out and actually in quite sizable numbers show their complete opposition to what's taken place and try and force the hand of their universities to do however little they're willing to kind of show solidarity and build a broader political climate of kind of internationalism, anti-imperialism within our universities. And I think that when we start talking about this, we need to start talking about laying down a serious level of national organisation around Stop the War in every campus that can actually start to build a link between what's happened locally and what we could do nationally. Because I think that the occupations have completely changed the way we're thinking about the next layer of mobilisations. When we were talking about the G20 before, actually in every campus there's a much wider layer of activists that understand the need for very political, very militant protest against kind of what our world leaders are doing. There's a much more real audience of people that we can win to the idea that what's happened in Palestine is fundamentally linked to what's happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think there's also kind of a political argument that we need to start playing about the solutions to the crisis, that actually the only way that Palestine can be free is if we break the hold of imperialism across the entire Middle East. And that means showing solidarity not just with the people of Palestine, but also with the people of Afghanistan and Iraq that have suffered most directly under the heel of American and British imperialism. That the only reason that Israel felt confident to go into Gaza was the ideological cover it had been given by the American regime's kind of rhetoric around fighting terrorism, that the Israeli government felt like they could bombard the people of the supporters of Hamas and to denounce them as kind of being the enemy within. I think also it means that we need to build kind of a much broader level of solidarity across the region. Because I think it was very significant in the first wave of demonstrations that the march went not just to the Israeli embassy, not just to the American embassy, but also to the Egyptian embassy, where for people that weren't aware, the Mubarak regime supported almost wholeheartedly the actions of Israel, closing the Rafah crossing and sealing in the people of Gaza. I think this is the role that people that come together nationally can start to play, about drawing out these lessons, the wider lessons of the struggle, the wider ideological context of what's taking place, and taking it out to much wider layers of people than have previously been possible. And I think that there's two or three things that come out of this meeting today. The two or three things that would be most significant would be, is if we could build a Stop the War group in almost every campus where an occupation has taken place, to make sure that the occupations aren't just a flash in the pan, but on the one hand we can keep to rebuild the spirit of student radicalism over a whole range of questions, but we can also guarantee there'll be a group of people making sure that kind of the message of what's happening in the Middle East, the fundamental political questions about what we can do to challenge imperialism, is something that gains kind of a permanent audience within our universities, that people are always aware about what's happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, that we have an immediate network of people that can respond very quickly to new flashpoints, if embargoes and bombs the west of Pakistan, or there's an escalation in Afghanistan, or the Israelis go back into the West Bank and Gaza. And I think also that we need to use this as a marker to get out the next two major national mobilisations. Because actually what will fundamentally defeat our government's role isn't simply a student movement. It's a movement that encompasses the whole of British civil society, the working class movement, those in their communities, those that have marched all those demonstrations. And actually now, we have something quite direct to take to those demonstrations. We can not only mobilise a much greater number of people, we can also say, actually, we have won something. We've won something concrete. For the first time in 20 or 30 years, we've forced the hand of our government, our university administrations to listen to our demands. The democratic expression of our movement sees that little bit more control about what happens in our spaces and our environment. And actually that's quite an inspiring message to take out to people, an inspiring message to take out into demonstrations. We've marched for 4 or 5 years against American and British imperialism in the Middle East. And actually now we can say that we're starting to win. Not only have kind of Blair and Bush now kind of removed from office and replaced at least nominally by people with a less of an association with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but actually we can start to push that a little bit more further, to push the boat out and show that what we've won in our universities can be won on a national scale. We can drive the G20 out of London, and we can show to NATO that actually we're going to open up the movement we had against Iraq onto the new front of Afghanistan, that they're not going to get away with quietly removing troops from one illegal, immoral war into another one. I think that that's something we need to make people incredibly aware of, that the war is not gone simply because they're talking about withdrawal from Iraq. Actually, they're opening up a new front, a front that's just as brutal, just as oppressive, and the movement should be just as committed to stopping.